now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change.
Our governments and corporate entities have known for decades the immediate change is needed. Yet change still has not come. And when the front line is gone, we are doomed. There is no undoing.
We're going to see effects like the flood level that accompanied the typical once-in-a-100-year event historically is going to come in many locations every year.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
Right now, federal governments are failing to act. The United States, to the horror of the world, withdrew from the Paris Agreement. But despite that, many of the other actors in charge of some of the most advanced and wealthiest economies have withdrawn from the agreement in action. Not a single one is on track to meet their Paris goals, because it is unsustainable to organize our society as we have, centered on prioritizing personal gain and profit over any and all human or planetary considerations. And frankly, it is unsustainable to continue to believe that our system of runaway, unaccountable, law-breaking pursuit of profit, whose inequality is so socially destabilizing that it is giving rise to authoritarians who burn our forests and challenge the democracies that listen to basic science, and to think that that has nothing to do with this.
Makes me very happy. This is session 2, Climate Matters, the Bad. So brace yourself for this one, folks. I'm hoping that watching this you haven't just recently eaten. If you have, you might want to let your food go down a bit first. Okay, a little challenge, a little question for you. I'm going to read a quote and see whether you can come up in your minds with the year that this was a quote from. Okay, this generation has altered the composition of the atmosphere on a global scale through a steady increase in carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels. That was Lyndon Johnson in a special message to US Congress. This year maybe? 2020? Maybe 2019? No, not at all. Out of the ballpark. You wouldn't believe it, 1965. Do you know, the average level of CO2 that we put out in 1 year these days globally is around 100 times that which is put out by the volcanoes around the world. Wouldn't believe it, would you? Okay, so we'll look at some pictures that cover different aspects of our life and our existence. So, first one. God said, "Subdue the earth." By that, did he mean we should tame and cultivate the land where necessary? Or did he mean that it's okay to pillage resources in an unsustainable fashion? Do you know that solar energy and wind can meet the daily global energy needs 100 times over. That's each day. Obviously, if we learn how to harness and distribute that properly. Yet, aren't we just determined to burn stuff, whether that's coal or gas or oil? Next one. Did you notice during the first COVID lockdown, I certainly did walking around, getting the daily exercise, how the air quality had improved so much locally. For once you could just suck in a nice deep lungful of air and it just felt fresh and clean, didn't it? And cities around the world, some of them had a decent view of their national monuments for the first time for a long time, because they're so used to those skylines being obscured in smog. If you drive a car, I suggest you find out what comes out of your exhaust pipe and what those chemicals do for human health. Personally, I had an epiphany moment. I happened upon a study that had been done by Which magazine about emissions from cars, and it wasn't just diesel cars. Changed my whole thinking on the thing. And then, of course, it's not long back, is it, that the whole Dieselgate thing broke. That Volkswagen and other manufacturers have been caught cheating emissions tests. People were buying cars that were a lot more polluting than they were being led to believe. Did you notice 2020, I think it was the freak cold snap that they had over in Texas, where the grid power failed? And it was a sad irony, to be honest. We've helped cause the problem, these extreme weather events, and folks struggled to keep warm. So what did they do? They jumped in their cars in their garages and run the engines for a bit of warmth, and folks died from asphyxiation. So the real scandal, it's a crime, isn't it? Evidence has come out that ExxonMobil and actually several of the legacy automakers, they knew decades ago what would happen to the planet if we kept on burning oil. And a bit like the tobacco industry, the execs, the CEO, they knew what effect their products were having, but if there was profit to be made, they'd keep on doing it. And that scientific data was just buried effectively by the PR departments. Oil producers, evidence has come out just recently, oil producers are still, to this day, after all that's happened, they're lobbying governments around the world to water down their policies on climate. So, next one, we'll look at forests. God, in his providence, gave us trees that absorb CO2. They thrive on CO2 like we thrive on oxygen. So what do we do in our folly? We cut them down, to a point that's not sustainable. So, the Amazon rainforest, when I was young, it was regarded as being the lungs of the earth. And scientists are saying now, some are suggesting that the Amazon rainforest has now crossed the tipping point, that it's giving out more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than it's absorbing. Okay, let's quick look at plastic. Imagine the life cycle of a plastic bag. It starts out as oil, a long way underground. You imagine the fossil fuels it takes to extract that oil to get it to a factory, to process it in the factory and turn it into a plastic bag, and then to ship that plastic bag to our supermarkets. And what, typically, that bag might cover some of our vegetables for maybe a quarter of an hour, and that's its useful working life, 15 minutes. And then what, typically, it ends up going into landfill, doesn't it? Or somewhere worse. Takes hundreds of years to degrade, doesn't it? Do you know the United Kingdom exports 1.8 million kilograms of plastic waste on a daily basis? We dump it on other countries, most of it. What about the oceans? There's an estimated 8.3 million tons going in the ocean every year. And all the different garbage patches across our oceans. Just for example, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch itself is about 3 times the size of France, which is just bonkers. Next one, oil. It's estimated that 706 million gallons of waste oil get dumped in the ocean each year, or spilt to the ocean. What about animals? We've read already in Genesis, rule over every living creature. So what does that mean? I think if you were to train dogs or horses to help you with your livestock, that makes sense. What about taming and training sufficiently oxen to help you plough your fields? I think that's alright. What do you think? Imagine when we kill an injured racehorse just because it's become a liability. It's no longer in a position to bring us profit. I don't think that counts, does it, as ruling? It's up for debate, isn't it? What about shooting a lion or a tiger just for sport? What about shooting an elephant for its tusks, or a rhino for its horn? Do you know, I find this really sad. 60% of the world's wildlife has been lost in the last 50 years at hands of humans. And that's the World Wildlife Fund coming up with that figure. Next one, you'd think the planet would be a big enough dustbin for us, wouldn't you? But we don't stop there. What about space? The image you're seeing at the moment, that's a computer-generated plot by NASA of all the rubbish we've left in space. Broken up satellites, that sort of thing. Then come on to chemicals. Oof. Have you seen the film Dark Waters? I've not seen the film, but I saw the documentary before the film came out. Chemical company in America, and for years they were just dumping a whole load of cancer-forming toxic chemicals into the local watercourse, and local people, local animals were being born with deformities, and then and different cancers. And the executives of that company, they just shrugged their shoulders about it for many years. Now on to food. Who here probably eats too much food? I'd be the first to put my hand up and say, if I'm stressed or working too hard or feeling a bit melancholy, it's easy, isn't it, to reach for the larder. Do you know, about 462 million adults across the world are regarded as being underweight. If, like me, you probably eat too much food, join the club. 1.9 billion overweight. And you know, in the United Kingdom alone, each year it's estimated we throw 15 million tons of food away. Did any of you see Dr. Chris Van Tulken, his program about ultra-processed foods? He interviewed a rep from the Food and Drink Federation, and that rep had to admit that their priority was profit above public health. I was a bit knocked back. The recent cancer research adverts, they've got that strapline, haven't they? 1 in 2 of us in our lifetime will get cancer. What? When I was old enough to understand those adverts, back when I was younger, that it used to be 1 in 5 or 1 in 7. It certainly wasn't 1 in 2. Now, if you're a humanist and watching this, is that what progress looks like? You know, is that survival of the fittest and evolution and what have you? We're going backwards for all the knowledge we've accumulated. I think of course it's noble and commendable, isn't it, to do research into diseases like that, but you've got to ask yourself, if those stats are changing so quickly, what are the sources? What is it in our environment that's causing it in the first place? So that's a lot of stuff to trawl through. I hope I haven't lost you, but we're all going to ask ourselves, haven't we? Is this the very good that God declared at the start? And of course, no, it's not, is it? And what's the common denominator across all these things? Is man, isn't it? It's things that we've done. I believe the condition of the planet throws a spotlight on man's condition. We have this innate tendency towards worship and adulation. You only have to go to our stadiums to see that, whether it's football stadium, whether it's music concert of different types, you know, God is a DJ, that sort of thing, and even political rallies. Here's someone new and fresh, maybe they will save us. Above all others, I believe, Creator God deserves and desires our spontaneous and genuine worship. But if you're forced to worship, then it really isn't worship, is it? That worship becomes worthless if it's forced. Hence, God gave us free will. If you read on into Genesis 3, you'll read about the fall of man. Apparently, paradise wasn't good enough for us. Adam and Eve broke the only one command that God had given them. That rebellion that we all have is like an inherited disease, isn't it? Have you ever seen a toddler when they don't get their own way? Throw a tantrum, but you know, you see it in them from a very early age, and it's in all of us. I think as adults we throw tantrums, we just find different ways of doing it, don't we? So we go it alone, we turn our backs on our Creator, me and my wants first. I'll try to control my own destiny. If other people become collateral damage along the way, then sorry, but I'm ploughing on, thank you. Back in the 1980s, when I was a teenager, I remember going to see Billy Graham preaching. It was a satellite relay from a bigger stadium to Gloucester Leisure Centre, actually. Billy Graham would talk about sin, wouldn't he? Yet still hundreds of thousands of people would flock to hear what he had to say. In the present day, I hear little talk of human nature, certainly no talk of sinful nature. It's something we've become shy or embarrassed or even threaten to be talking about. So I wonder those folks in the Billy Graham rallies, and I wonder about World War II. Maybe those folks there, they were either old enough to have experienced the war themselves personally, directly, or they might be children of parents who have experienced the war, and the kids have grown up in a household where that's been part of their conversation, their experience. Of course, in wartime, people witnessed the evil that man is capable of doing to man. So we'll just whip through a few verses from the Bible. I'll just give you a little reference where to find them if you want to look them up. Galatians 6, in there it says, "A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction." In 1 Timothy 6, you'll find people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. In Matthew 6, you cannot serve both God and money. Matthew 16, what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? And Romans 6, the wages of sin is death. Just take dropping litter as a simple example, a simple illustration. If you willfully throw litter down, I believe you're showing disdain or contempt for both your creator, the natural world, and your fellow man. Jesus effectively sums up the Old Testament, doesn't he? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. The second is this: love your neighbour as yourself. Can't you see how that's in polar opposite to what we do, human nature? It's like if God is walking in one direction, we're just very blatantly walking in the completely opposite direction, aren't we? And if we're honest, each of us can look back, can't we, at our personal backstories and acknowledge and recognise how our sin personally manifests itself in many ways. So finally, just to finish, I plucked up the courage to have a look in Revelation. Some of the judgments coming our way. Apparently a quarter of the earth will succumb to war, starvation, disease and wild animals. A third of the earth was burnt up, a third of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. Yikes. And even more brutal, folks, Revelation 11 verse 18, the time has come, amongst other things, for destroying those who destroy the earth. Whew. So, are we stuffed on all fronts, basically? Well, I believe not, and I'll promise you that there's hope to come in the next and the final session. Thank you.